Hey everybody. So the last time we were here, I talked to you guys about fearsome critters, strange, otherworldly beasts that made up the substance of 19th and 20th century lumberjack folklore. But these creatures weren't the only subjects of North American tall tales. Lumberjacks were known to have created other mythical figures, most notable among these being a legendary woodsman named Paul Bunyan. Bunyan's legend wasn't always as fantastical as we see it now. He was originally said to be 8 feet tall and exceedingly skilled at felling trees, before being blown into the larger-than-life figure seen in films and literature today. One such example of these was created in 1958, an animated musical developed by the Walt Disney Company, an animation and overall entertainment company that was seeing great success in the early 60s. The company would continue to prosper throughout the century, even after the death of its founder, and alongside it, the medium of animation continued to remain at the forefront of worldwide culture. As we drifted into the 70s and 80s, one could see countless entrepreneurs and startup companies being formed, with the goal of one day rivaling the animation giants of the time. And, as the 90s finally rolled around, one such startup struck out with the intention of merging the time-honored animation tradition with the rapidly developing and infinitely diverse field of video game development. And while this company may not have thrived in the way it intended, its legacy has indeed lived on, in quite an unusual way. Let's take a look at the rise and fall of animation magic. Now, if you've been on the internet for any reasonable amount of time, you've probably seen something like this, or if you're lucky, this. And if it's stuck with you, you're not alone. This incredibly distinctive style, rough 90s era edges, jerky, over-exaggerated movements, bizarre and uncanny voice acting, is something that's been striking chords with internet users for over a decade and a half. And despite all the changes the internet goes through, they won't die out. These timeless animations always seem to find their way back into the internet's public consciousness. And these animations all have one major thing in common. They were all produced by the Russo-American game development firm Animation Magic in the last decade of the 20th century. But to understand how they got here, we first need to understand how they started. A man named Dale Disharoon was born May 13th of 1953 in the United States, and he would spend most of his childhood and early adulthood in the state of California. In 1981, Disharoon was working as a teacher, a position he had assumed soon after leaving college. The school's principal, seeing the recent personal computer boom in the US, had expressed interest in getting computers for the school, something Disharoon initially opposed. Once a series of Atari computers had been installed, however, Disharoon became fascinated by the potential personal computers had for the future of media. Throughout the early 80s, he experimented with writing his own programs in these early computer systems, at one point winning thousands of dollars in computer gear from a quarterly Atari programming competition. Disharoon would soon leave the education industry and work a few odd jobs, all involving the computer systems he had become invested in, and by the mid-80s he had started his own company, a small independent software production house called Dale Disharoon Incorporated, where he would work on a number of programs for the Apple II, Commodore 64, and other contemporary systems. But his involvement with animation magic wouldn't truly begin until 1987. That year, Disharoon would move to Boston to work for Spinnaker Software, a company that had been trailblazing the low-cost edutainment game market for years. And, at the time of his joining, the company was just beginning work on a new, yet-to-be-released, yet supposedly revolutionary technology that Disharoon would soon come to know very well. This system was the CDI. Designed by tech conglomerate Philips, the CDI was a new format of CD that allowed substantial multimedia storage space and the potential for interactive components. It was designed to work with Philips' own CDI consoles and aimed to combine elements of contemporary CD players with the game systems becoming more and more common. And, as Disharoon began to work for Spinnaker, the game company was being tasked with creating 7 games to be available on the launch of the CDI. In 1989, Philips remarkably managed to secure a deal with up-and-coming game studio Nintendo, licensing Philips to create Nintendo-branded games to further entice the public into purchasing the CDI console upon release. But this was short-lived. The CDI's development cycle lasted far longer than was intended, and by the time of its release, the CDI console was running on heavily outmoded hardware. Nintendo pulled out of the contract in 1990, but not before making what was, at the time, a small concession to Philips. The company could use a limited number of Nintendo's recognizable characters in games for their console, and while it wasn't the full Nintendo partnership they were looking for, it was better than nothing. By the time the CDI finally went public in 1991 with the 7 Spinnaker games and a number of others, Dale Disharoon felt his time with the company was over. He left that year, and with a number of other Spinnaker employees, founded a new game design group, which temporarily went by the same name as his previous one, Dale Disharoon Incorporated. And since the company had been formed from most of the same team that had made these surprisingly successful Spinnaker games, Dale Disharoon Incorporated was soon contacted by Philips to create a few more. Philips was looking to make use of the characters Nintendo had allowed them to use, specifically characters from the Legend of Zelda and Super Mario franchises, both very popular at the time. Disharoon accepted the task and set to work designing, but the group quickly ran into a problem. Dale Disharoon Incorporated, while abundant with computer programmers, was lacking in the animation department, something Philips had specifically wanted to showcase the full motion capabilities of their new console. In late 1991, Disharoon got in contact with a man named Igor Razbov, a mathematician and computer scientist from St. Petersburg, Russia. Razbov proposed going into business with Disharoon, using Russian animators in conjunction with the US-based designers and programmers to form a cohesive unit which could deliver the games Philips was expecting on their unusually low budget. Disharoon accepted, and with this, animation magic was formed.